Well, again, welcome everyone. The opening ceremony of the 2024 Olympic Games included some very controversial scenes this year. There was a scene where members of the LGBT community appeared to be depicting the Last Supper of Jesus Christ. Now, this did look very much like the painting of the Last Supper by the artist Leonardo da Vinci. And several websites posted a picture of this scene next to da Vinci's Last Supper for a comparison. So how did Christian leaders generally react to what may have appeared to them as a mockery, an intentional mockery of Jesus' Last Supper? Well, Christian religious leaders condemned the ceremony. C-Spire, a U.S. telecommunications provider, pulled its advertising from the Olympic Games. Christians in general were very upset. They claimed that the scene was intentionally making a mockery of the Last Supper. But is that true? Was this scene indeed intentionally mocking Christ's Last Supper as depicted by Leonardo da Vinci's famous painting? Or was it just a coincidence? Or was it perhaps something else? What do we think? What have we heard? I'd like to quote from a recent article at usatoday.com. The title of the article is, "Did the Olympics Mock the Last Supper?" Explaining Dionysus and why Christians are angry. It was subtitled, "Was the opening ceremony performance a mockery of Christianity, as some are suggesting? Or was it a homage to the Greek god Dionysus, as organizers proclaim?" Quote, "The parade down the River Seine featured plenty of eye-catching moments that sparked online fervor, including one now particularly infamous scene that outraged many Christians who lambasted its resemblance to Leonardo da Vinci's famed Last Supper painting. In the tableau," now stop for a second here, for those who may not know what a tableau is, according to the Merriam-Webster Dictionary, a tableau is short for tableau vivant, from French, literally living picture, is a depiction of a scene usually presented on a stage by silent and motionless costumed participants. Okay, now that we know what a tableau is, so back to our quote. In the tableau, a scantily clad man painted in blue emerged at the center of a table to sing among dancing drag queens. Conservative and Christian leaders were quick to condemn the scene as an offensive parody of imagery and symbolism at the center of their faith, despite the insistence of the ceremony organizers that they took inspiration from an ancient pagan festival. So, was the brief scene a mockery of Christianity, as some are suggesting? Or was it a homage to a Greek god, Dionysus, as organizers proclaim? End quote. The word homage means deep respect and often praise shown for a person or God. That definition is from the dictionary located at dictionary.cambridge.org, by the way. So the organizers are claiming that they were just showing deep respect and praise for their Greek god Dionysus, that this scene had nothing to do with Christ or the Last Supper. Back to the article again. Quote, "The performance featuring Dionysus was one of the many highlights of the opening ceremony to this year's Summer Olympics, taking place Friday on and along the Seine. The tableau, which was broadcast during the ceremony, included a woman wearing a silver halo-like crown at the center of a long table flanked by drag queens. The scene is promptly disrupted when a nearly naked man, painted blue, emerges from a dinner plate surrounded by fruit. As he begins singing, the drag queens break out into dance behind him. It wasn't long until the scene prompted outcry from Christian and conservative leaders in the United States who viewed its imagery as a mockery of the Last Supper. But the opening ceremony's artistic director, Thomas Jolly, has insisted that the scene is not a reference at all to the Last Supper, Rather, the performance is a nod to a pagan celebration featuring Dionysus, the Greek god of fertility, wine, and revelry. Close quote. So the artistic director, Thomas Jolly, claims that this had nothing to do with the Last Supper of Jesus Christ, but rather it was all about respecting and praising the pagan gods of ancient Greece. But then what do the Olympics have to do with pagan gods in the first place? I'd like to quote next from Britannica.com regarding the Olympics. Quote, ancient Olympic Games, quadrennial athletic event that was held in Olympia, Greece from 776 BCE to about 339 CE. It was part of a religious festival that honored Zeus, and the name Olympics was derived from Mount Olympus, home of the Greek gods. Although the Olympics ended in the late 4th century CE, they continued to attract interest. In the late 19th century, concerted efforts began to revive the Games, and in 1896, the first modern Olympics were held in Athens. So the Olympics, named for Mount Olympus, home of the gods, was a religious festival. I didn't know that. Now, the Greeks at that time had many gods, and also at that time, homosexuality was relatively well accepted in Greek culture. Even the Greek gods themselves were said to have had homosexual characteristics. You might want to check that out. But the important point here is that the original Olympics were a religious ritual, and these games honored their gods. Now, not the one true God, but the pagan gods of the Greeks. Gods like Zeus, Apollo, and Dionysus. Dionysus, of course, being the god of sexuality. Keep that in mind for a moment. And I believe this is consistent with what many of us witnessed in these opening ceremonies. The Greek god Dionysus with the gods on Mount Olympus behind him. Gods that were depicted as homosexual as well. Now, if that is true, then why the uncanny resemblance to the Last Supper? Was this just a coincidence? Well, not really. Where did all the false gods come from anyway? Gods like Moloch and Dagon. Greek gods like Zeus and Dionysus. I believe they all got their start from Satan. Satan's very clever. He has access to Scripture and to Bible prophecy, and he could see much of God's true plan. He knew what God had in mind. But we also know that Satan is a counterfeiter, much more so than a creator. He likes to take something that is pure, true, and holy to God, and then deliberately twist it into a counterfeit that has similar characteristics to what God has planned, but also has other characteristics that are very ungodly. Satan makes a mockery of the true God with all his false gods. And all these counterfeit gods are designed to appeal to us, to compel us to believe they're real. And all these false gods, again, have some characteristics of the true God, but lead us astray in many other ways. So to me, it's no surprise that the gods of Mount Olympus gathered together look very much like Christ with his disciples gathered together, because again, this was a counterfeit. But part of Satan's counterfeit might look familiar to us. But we might note the very obvious sexual aspects of the gods of Mount Olympus are very different from what we saw at Christ's Last Supper. This is where Satan's counterfeit, its deception comes in. It looks a little the same, but it's actually very different. So do I personally believe that artistic director Thomas Jolly, when he says that this had nothing to do with the Last Supper of Jesus Christ, but rather was all about showing homage, meaning deep respect and praise, to the pagan gods of ancient Greece? Well, I do actually. I probably believe he's telling the truth. But if the Olympics are indeed a religious ceremony honoring the ancient Greek gods, plural you might say, shouldn't we see more than just what might appear to be an intentional mockery of Christianity by this ceremony? Shouldn't we also see signs and other elements of the Greeks' worship of other false gods and goddesses? After all, they had many. Let's take a look at the article from msn.com. This article is titled, Official Olympics Account Invokes Zeus, Apollo, in Pagan Ritual at Olympia. Quote, the Olympic torch was lit Tuesday as an actress playing a Greek high priestess invoked the names of Zeus and Apollo. Quoting the priestess, Apollo, god of sun, and the idea of light, send your rays and light the sacred torch for the hospitable city of Paris. And you, Zeus, give peace to all peoples on earth, and wreath the winners of the sacred race. End quote. Here we clearly see a prayer to the gods. First, we saw a prayer to the sun god Apollo to light the sacred torch. And second, a prayer to the false god Zeus to give peace and to wreath the winners of the sacred race. What people were witnessing in the Olympics opening ceremony had nothing to do with Jesus Christ and everything to do with the ancient pagan Greek gods. Although I'm not so sure they're so ancient anymore. Seems they're here today. Here's another article about the Olympics opening ceremony I'd like to read to you. This is from apnews.com. Quote, after a glittering metal horse galloped across the Seine, a woman wearing silver armor rode a real horse while carrying the official Olympic flag, which wound up being raised upside down. Who is the woman on horseback? Her name is Floriane Izzert, a gendarmerie non-commissioned officer. She was meant to be the representation of the Olympic spirit and of Sequana, the goddess of the Seine River, end quote. The goddess of the Seine River. Well, who exactly is this Sequana, goddess of the Seine River? Well, from Oxford Reference, located at oxfordreference.com, Sequana is, quote, goddess of the source of the river Seine, whose healing shrine, Fontes Sequana, springs of Sequana, dating from the 2nd century BC, is found northwest of Dijon, eastern France. Despite her Celtic origin, Sequana was clearly esteemed by the Romans, who enlarged Fontes Sequana with 2 large temples. She is represented by a large bronze statuette of a draped young woman wearing a diadem or a crown, with arms outstretched as if to welcome suppliants and standing in a duck-shaped boat. Details and surviving figures imply much about the nature of Sequana's worship. Her devotees are depicted in heavy, hooded, woolen cloaks, the kind worn by ordinary Celtic peasants. They bear her gifts of fruit, money, or pet animals. A large pot inscribed with Sequana's name is filled with silver and bronze body parts to be cured by her. Simultaneously, complete bodies, as well as coins and jewelry, are offered to her, presumably in the hope of a reciprocal cure. End quote. So she was apparently healing people, or so they thought. My point here is that the original Olympic Games was a religious ritual that honored the false gods and goddesses of the ancient Greeks. I also might mention that foundational to the Olympic Games was national and personal pride. Each nation put forth their best, and the nations took pride in the medals brought home from the Olympic Games. We still see this pride today. Now, I've spoken on pride before. And pride was Satan's downfall, as well as the downfall of Sodom and Gomorrah. But it seems to me that in the modern resurgence of the Games, the religious aspect of the Olympics has been played down in favor of the more positive aspects of the game. We're told that the Games promote peace and diversity, at least that's what I've been told. Although some athletes today, those refusing to shake the hand of the opponents, do not seem to be making that statement very well. The Olympic Games were historically based on the ancient Greek religion. That aspect was not really highlighted until now, it seems. This religious aspect of the Games, although present from the very beginning, is now being brought back into focus. Now, I believe the question should not be whether this year's opening ceremonies mocked the Last Supper or not, but simply, is a display of false gods and goddesses something we should embrace? Or, of course, something we as Christians should condemn in its entirety? Neither Jesus nor his disciples would have prayed to nor given homage to any of these false gods or goddesses. They would have never worshipped as the heathen did, nor would they have depicted scenes of false god worship and glorified them in any way. Let's go ahead and turn to Exodus 20, verse 1. That's Exodus chapter 20, verse 1. You probably know where I'm going. That's Exodus chapter 20. We'll begin there in verse 1. You know, we read familiar scriptures in the past, like Jeremiah 10, verse 2. And there it tells us not to learn the ways of the heathen. But again, Exodus 20, verse 1. Of course, we're going to read the first two of the Ten Commandments. Exodus 20, verse 1. And God spoke all these words, saying, I am the Lord your God, which have brought you out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. You shall have no other gods before me. Well, I would say this would certainly apply to the ancient Greek gods and goddesses, as well as all the other and false pagan gods. We should have no other gods, just the one true God, the actual creator of all. Verse 4. You shall not make unto you any graven image, or any likeness of anything that is in heaven above, or that is in the earth beneath, or that is in the water under the earth. You shall not bow down yourself to them, nor serve them. I think this is something we probably saw in the Olympics as well, but I'll add not just to bow down and serve them, but not to pay homage to them in any form. Continuing. For I, the Lord your God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children unto the third and fourth generation of them that hate me, and showing mercy unto the thousands of them that love me and keep my commandments. And the first two of the Ten Commandments tell us not to associate with any false gods or to have any idols as the heathen did. But not only that, God is serious about our even being exposed to the worship of false gods. He doesn't even want us to be exposed to them, not to see them, not to talk about them. But of course, that's exactly what happened in the opening ceremonies of the Olympics this year. We were exposed to false gods. Or I suppose I might rather say, they exposed themselves to us. Turn to Deuteronomy chapter 12. Yeah, it's hard to believe. Deuteronomy chapter 12, I'll start right there in verse 1. Deuteronomy chapter 12. You know, here, rather than to acknowledge and promote false gods, as we just saw at the Olympics, God, of course, told the Israelites to destroy all signs of pagan worship when they entered the land he'd promised them. He didn't want them to be tempted in any way to embrace those false gods. Let's read about it in Deuteronomy chapter 12, verse 1. These are the statutes and judgments which you shall observe to do in the land which the Lord God of your fathers gives you to possess it, all the days that you live upon the earth. Okay, here we go, verse 2. You shall utterly destroy all the places wherein the nations which you shall possess served their gods, upon the high mountains and upon the hills and under every green tree. You shall overthrow their altars and break their pillars and burn their groves with fire. You shall hew down the graven images of their gods and destroy the names of them out of that place. You shall not do so unto the Lord your God. Now, God does not want us to acknowledge false gods. God doesn't even want us to be exposed to the ways of the heathen, let alone expose them to other people. Of course, that's, like I said, exactly what the opening ceremony of the Olympics did, expose us to those false gods and goddesses. Drop down to verse 29. Verse 29, if you would. When the Lord your God shall cut off the nations from before you, where you go to possess them, and you succeed them, and dwell in their land, take heed to yourself, that you be not snared by following them, after that they be destroyed from before you. Now, why was it that God destroyed these people anyway? Well, because they worshiped false gods. Continuing in verse 30, and that you inquire not, you ask not after their gods, saying, how did these nations serve their gods? Even so, well, I do likewise. Or as verse 30 reads in the easy-to-read version, I'll read that again. But be careful that you don't fall into the same trap they did. Don't go to the false gods for help. Don't say to yourself, they worship these gods, so I will worship them too. But don't forget, remember we saw prayers to the false gods Apollo and Zeus to begin the Olympics this year. Verse 31, back to the King James. You shall not do so unto the Lord your God, for every abomination to the Lord which he hates have they done unto their gods. For even their sons and their daughters they have burnt in the fire to their gods. What things soever I command you, observe to do it. You shall not add to, nor diminish from it. And of course that includes the first two of the 10 Commandments. Let's turn next, if you would, to Exodus. That's Exodus chapter 23. Exodus chapter 23, verse 13. Now, some of us might be saying, Alan, come on. We know these ancient Greek gods are not real. We don't actually pray to them or worship them, so what's the harm? The Olympic ceremonies are just reminding us of history, of the past. So what's the problem with that? What's the problem of reminding of these false gods? Well, let's look at Exodus 23, verse 13. Here we read, and in all things that I have said unto you, be circumspect, and make no mention of the name of other gods, neither let it be heard out of your mouth. As I said before, God does not want us to have anything to do with any of these false gods, Greek or otherwise. When we hear others honoring or promoting the names of false gods, like the Greek gods Zeus, Apollo, Dionysus, or the goddess Iguana, this is an abomination to our one true God. God really, really wants us to stay away from all of their false gods and goddesses. We're not to even say their names. You're probably wondering why I just did that, right? Sometimes I wonder if I should use the names of these false gods when I speak about them. Now, I'm hoping that making people aware of them is a positive thing. I never use their names to promote them or to glorify them, but only to expose them. If you think about it, we do actually say the names of false gods and goddesses when we read about them in our Bibles. We read about gods like Bacchus or goddesses like Artemis and Diana, but they're never spoken of in a positive light. They're just there to teach us. Now, I don't believe that anyone who sincerely reads the Bible and sincerely desires to be a follower of Jesus Christ would even dream of worshiping other false gods or paying homage to them in any way. Would we agree with that? A true follower of Jesus Christ would never worship as a heathen did, or even mention the names of other gods, unless it was just to expose and condemn them, right? Will we agree with that? Let's set aside the modern Olympics for a moment. We'll come back to them. What about our modern churches? Would they embrace counterfeit gods, like the Greek gods maybe? Surely the Christian churches of today would never promote false gods or any form of idolatry. Or would they? Think about this. Jesus tells us that he is Lord of the Sabbath day, the seventh day of the week. You can find that in Luke 6, verse 5. Let me just read that to you. Luke 6, verse 5 says, and he, Jesus, said to them that the Son of Man, that's Christ, is Lord also of the Sabbath. So Jesus is Lord of the seventh-day Sabbath. I think we all know that. So who is Lord of the first day of the week, or Sunday? Anybody know? Well, for one, that would be the false god Baal, or Baal as some people call him, because Baal means Lord. Baal, or really any of the related sun gods, were worshipped on the first day of the week, Sun Day, the day of the sun. The true God gave us his holy days to teach us about how he plans to save mankind. We can find all of them listed in Leviticus 23. But in contrast, the false god Saturn gives us nothing related to true Christianity or to our future or any truth. He was simply honored by exchanging gifts, singing in the streets, and performing many of the rituals that we see today as Christmas. Then there is the pagan observance of the resurrection of the false god Tammuz and the goddess Ishtar. Depending on the culture, Ishtar might be called Ashtoreth, the Queen of Heaven, or Easter. Now, both Tammuz and Easter were resurrected on the same day, so they say. So the original pagan festival was named for the false goddess Easter. Apparently Easter was a more important false deity than Tammuz. But Easter was also known as a fertility goddess, hence the eggs and the rabbits associated with her day. And of course there's the sunrise service that worships the rising sun, or the sun god to be more precise. Now, I find it extremely ironic that while many Christian leaders today condemn the display of the ancient Greeks as they worship their false gods, they accept Sunday as their weekly holy day, the day of the Lord. Actually, the day of Baal, that Lord, which is observed on the first day of the week. Our true Lord's day is the seventh-day Sabbath, just as he told us. Our Bibles tell us to keep the Passover. But many Christian leaders today promote Easter, instead with the sunrise service facing the rising sun and representing the pagan sun god. True Christians worship and follow Jesus Christ. They do not acknowledge or have anything to do with any false gods. Satan's counterfeit gods, to be more accurate. True Christians cannot follow Christ, and at the same time acknowledge false gods like Baal, the fertility god of ancient Syria and Canaan, or Zeus, Apollo, and Dionysus, the fertility god of ancient Greece. Let's turn to 1 Kings, if you would. 1 Kings chapter 18, verse 21. 1 Kings chapter 18, 21. 1 Kings chapter 18, verse 21. I'd like to look at the advice the prophet Elijah gives us on this. Now, here we'll find Elijah was dealing with the Israelites who were trying to worship Baal, a false god. At the same time, the one true God as well. Something it seems that many Christians seem to be trying to do today. They seem to mix the paganism with Christianity, or at least they're trying. So what was Elijah's advice for those who were claiming to follow the true God, yet dabbling in Baal worship? Again, 1 Kings 18, verse 21. And Elijah came unto all the people and said, How long halt you, or will you hesitate, between two opinions? If the Lord, that's eternal, be God, follow him. But if Baal, then follow him. The prophet Elijah tells us that if we believe the eternal is God, worship him. But if we believe that Baal or some other false god is the true God, then Elijah says, worship him. But we should not try to worship both at the same time. That won't work. The Greek Olympic Games were originally created to be part of a pagan religious service, worshiping the pagan gods of ancient Greece, false gods that were even believed to be practicing homosexuality themselves. The opening ceremonies of the Olympics this year merely depicted the worship of these pagan gods, the honoring of them. After all, this was the original purpose of the Olympic Games in the first place. Now, I personally believe there was never any intention of mocking Jesus' Last Supper, as many Christian leaders have claimed. The true Christians today follow Jesus Christ and keep his commandments, including the commandments to avoid any involvement with false gods of any kind. Now, while Christian leaders claim blasphemy at the alleged mockery of the Last Supper, I believe they refuse to see the elephant in the room. The Olympics were created and are based on the worship of false gods and goddesses, period. What about the prayers to the false gods Zeus and Apollo? What about the nearly naked man representing Dionysus, the god of sexuality, or the appearance of the false goddess Sequana? Should we be upset that the creators of this year's Olympic ceremonies attempted to blaspheme God by intentionally mocking the Last Supper? No, I don't think so. I don't think that was their intent. In fact, I think the creators of this year's Olympic opening ceremonies did a pretty good job of depicting the ancient pagan Greek gods as they were worshipped. The problem for true Christians is not that this single scene seemed to anger so many. The issue for true Christians is that the entire idea of the acknowledgement of false gods is an abomination to God. We should not even be speaking their names, let alone promoting these false gods and goddesses through what many might see today as entertainment. Real Christian leaders need not to condemn just this one part of the ceremony, but all depictions of false pagan gods wherever they may be found, in the Olympics or elsewhere. So the issue for true Christians is not just the one scene in the opening ceremony of the Olympics, it's about all of the false god worship going on today. You know, many prominent Christian pastors have denounced the mocking of God they see in that one scene, yet they actually promote the very same thing. Whether we observe Dionysus, the fertility god of the Greeks, or Easter, the fertility goddess with her eggs and rabbits representing fertility, or Santa Claus, or trunk or treat, which is Halloween in disguise, all promote false gods or goddesses, and all are an abomination to God. Recent statistics indicate a decline in those who believe in the God of our Bibles today. Now, with that decline, a vacuum is being created, you might say. When people turn away from the true God, they still have a desire to believe in something. Turn to Matthew chapter 12, if you would. That's Matthew chapter 12 and verse 43. Matthew chapter 12, verse 43. Now, I believe that this void becomes the perfect opening for false gods, for demonic gods to enter into the picture. You know, there are many who thankfully have rejected Satan in the past and followed the one true God. That's great. But it seems that today, many have actually abandoned the one true God. Now, Matthew 12, verse 43 does not address this directly, but I do believe the same principle applies. Let's take a look at it in Matthew 12, verse 43. When the unclean spirit is gone out of a man, he walks through dry places, seeking rest, and finds none. Then he says, I'll return into my house, from whence I came out. And when he has come, he finds it empty, swept, and garnished. So I would say this might represent a situation where a person is now forsaken God. He's empty, you might say. There's nothing there. So the demonic spirits are looking for a void, a human without the true God, or anything for that matter. Verse 45. Then goes he, the evil spirit, the demon, then goes he and takes with himself 7 other spirits more wicked than himself, and they enter in and dwell there. And the last state of that man is worse than the first. Even so shall it be also unto this wicked generation. I believe we're seeing many former Christians reject God today, and it's very sad. And when they do, the false gods are right there waiting for them with their demons. But should we be surprised about this? Should this shock us? Turn to 2 Timothy with me, if you would. That's 2 Timothy chapter 4. 2 Timothy chapter 4, and we'll go to verse 3, toward the beginning. 2 Timothy 4, verse 3. You know, Christ warned us that in the last days, people would turn away from the one true God. He warned us that they would turn to fables, like the gods of the ancient Greeks. Fables. not truth. Again, 2 Timothy 4, verse 3. We read there, "For the time will come when they," not Christians, true Christians, "they will not endure sound doctrine, but after their own lusts shall they heap to themselves teachers having itching ears. And they shall turn away their ears from the truth and shall be turned unto fables." Brethren, I believe that time is now. If we believe our Bibles, we know that deception will increase in the last days. The worship of pagan gods will continue to increase, as will deception in general. It'll be more commonplace, out in the open. But we, brethren, must continue to hold fast to the truth of God. We need to avoid the false gods that are being presented to us today. We need to reject the worship or even the acknowledgement of false gods. We're not to pay them homage. We're to reject them in favor of the one true God of our Bibles. You know, as pride was a large part of the original Olympic Games, I believe pride today prevents many from admitting that they might just be involved in the worship of false gods, even in what are called Christian churches. For our last scripture today, let's end with this. Let's go to Romans chapter 12. Romans chapter 12. We'll begin in verse 1. We'll end with that. So, brethren, let's be careful. Let's not let the world draw us in through entertainment or any other means. Let's not conform to the world as they return to the worship of false gods. Again, Romans 12, verse 1 to end today. We read this the other day, but I think it's worth reading again. Romans 12:1. Paul says, "I beseech you, therefore, brethren, by the mercies of God, that you present your bodies a living sacrifice, holy, acceptable to God, which is your reasonable service." And this is very important, verse 2. "And be not conformed to this world, but be you transformed by the renewing of your mind, that you may prove what is that good and acceptable and perfect will of God."